It's been standing here for close to a century. Majestic, stately, a mountain of 19th century architecture and good old-fashioned American dreams and know-how. A monument of steel and Bedford limestone. St. Louis's Union Station. When it was completed in 1894, Union Station became the railroad hub of a vast and growing nation. Over the decades that followed, this train station made a unique mark, not only on the railroad industry itself, but also on the people who journeyed through this train station. By the thousands and tens of thousands, eventually by the hundreds of thousands, they kept coming, heading east or moving west, bound for new adventure, bound for home, bound for war. For close to 80 years, they kept coming. The railroad provided speed for travelers crisscrossing the country. By the 1960s, however, the railroads clearly were losing the transportation battle to the airplane and automobile. Union Station would pay a devastating price. This giant building, with its limestone walls and railroad tracks, became a victim of urban decay. Travelers running to catch trains were replaced by vagrants looking for shelter. This once noble Union Station had become a rotting pocket of poverty, a dying eyesore with no good use. But today, Union Station stands as proud and as majestic as ever. For this rock and steel bastion is now this country's hallmark of restoration, the bellwether of an extraordinary effort to preserve our past and link it with a promising future. Union Station has been reborn, recreated by a new breed of pioneers, financiers, developers, and craftsmen, armed with new skills, filled with vision and spirit, and driven by those good old-fashioned American dreams and know-how. Perhaps it was fate, or just a little luck, but this historic restoration project actually began in January of 1979, when a snowstorm blanketed the Midwest, paralyzing the entire St. Louis metropolitan area and canceling the travel plans of an investment banker from New York City.
The president of Oppenheimer Properties, Jim Levy, was out here in the winter of 1979, January, got snowed in and was told about this facility and the fact that it was available, and came to take a look at it. Fell in love with it, came back to New York, and called me in and told me to come by it and do something with it.
From the beginning, Steve Miller and Oppenheimer Properties saw Union Station not as a rundown relic, but as a genuine opportunity. While other developers with similar goals for this property had failed, this venture would be different. In 1894, it cost the Terminal Railroad Association of St. Louis $6.5 million to build Union Station. This time, it would cost Oppenheimer $135 million to rebuild it.
We're opportunists. We don't do deals that follow any particular mold. We look for opportunities that other people overlook. We really saw this place as an opportunity, a spectacular building, a big piece of land, in a very exciting city. We could buy it for $1.5 million less than it cost to build it in 1894. Not knowing exactly what to do with it, we decided that we could do something with it on that basis. We had a preconceived notion of putting a hotel here, but it became clear that due to the locational factors and this particular area, that what we had to create here was something more than just a hotel, that we had to create a destination. So conceptually, we arrived at a concept of hotel and specialty retail.
The scope of the Union Station project grew quickly and dramatically. It became so big, in fact, Oppenheimer searched for a major national developer to step into the picture. The restoration of Union Station would become the largest project of its kind in the nation. The developer would have to be a pioneer in restoration and at the same time capable of managing the hundreds of craftsmen, designers, construction workers, even the accountants and lawyers who would be part of this massive project. The Rouse Company of Columbia, Maryland was the choice. Harry Polley was named Senior Development Director. In August of 1981, he arrived in St. Louis for what he soon realized would be a once-in-a-lifetime project.
I was advised that I was going to be the development director on this project, and came out to St. Louis, and immediately not only wanted to inspect the building and see what we're going to be working with. Well, the station itself was awe-inspiring. It was huge. However, it was a derelict. It was just a big hulk, decaying and rapidly just falling apart. Our technology allows us to build magnificent things. But it's one thing to build, but it's another thing to maintain. And if you don't maintain, nature will quickly try to take back what you've carved out of nature. And that was happening here. The building was in such bad condition, it had not had heat for a number of years. So every winter, the condensation would form on the walls and the water would run down the walls. I estimate that, or at the time, it became quite apparent that another winter or two and the building would have been beyond salvation. It was weathering so badly.
One of the focal points of the original Union Station centered on a stained glass window over the station's main entrance. Amidst the terminal's deterioration, this window had remained unscathed.
The stained glass window is a very significant stained glass window in St. Louis.
Donna Laidlaw is the Rouse Company's project coordinator.
The glass depicts three ladies seated on a bench, one being New York, one San Francisco, and the center one, of course, is St. Louis. And behind her is the old courthouse. The window is done with glass from the Tiffany studios and is very rich in detail and color and texture. The ladies' draperies are of a folded drapery kind of glass that's very heavy. The glass is actually plated in many areas, has 3 different layers in several sections to add depth and richness to the color. Well, in an early description of the glass window, in fact, it was at the time of the opening of the station in 1894, one of the reviewers in the paper talks about this window, and he talked about how the east and west, being New York and San Francisco, were looking fondly towards St. Louis, but that she was staring straight ahead and passionately, not showing any favoritism for either the east or the west. I've always found that rather curious and a real indication of the spirit and the attitude in St. Louis in 1894 that surrounded the building of this station.
With a similar spirit and attitude, the restoration of Union Station had begun. For those first on the job, it would become more than a job. They soon discovered many of their decisions were made out of a deep sense of obligation and commitment to the building itself. The goal became a simple one: find a way to let the station retain its 19th century heritage and dignity, and at the same time, create a new building that would attract a new generation heading into the highly technical 21st century. The solution was unusually complicated and challenging. The job of designing the new Union Station went to HOK, Helmuth, Obata, and Kassabaum, an architectural firm from St. Louis. At one point, HOK considered turning the station's 11-acre train shed into a giant garden, environmentally controlled by solar energy.
I know that Don and...
We did some dreaming. What is it to make a garden underneath this great sun canopy? And ultimately, the garden theme stayed with us for the entire life of the project. The solar energy side of the project fell by the wayside. There was no way to make the payback work.
All of the previous developers interested in rehabilitating Union Station had plans to restore all 60 acres of the property at one time, but not Oppenheimer, Rouse, and HOK. Their strategy called for a phase-by-phase construction. The initial phase would encompass only 15 acres and would convert the main head house and train shed into a 550-room hotel and retail complex.
At the time, we finally got the plans developed, got the preliminary costs in place, and the time had come to go finance. We were in the fall of '82, very difficult time in the financing markets. Most lenders had their loan windows closed, didn't want to hear about anything. This was a project that scared a lot of lenders. But we decided strategically that the way to handle that was to break the financing down into enough small pieces that no one lender or financial source was going to have to bear an inordinately high risk. And so we ended up with a financing package which really includes 5 separate pieces.
But there was one other factor: ITCs, or investment tax credits. They generate a return to the investors by substantially reducing their personal taxes. In the case of Union Station, investment tax credits proved to be the difference in pulling together a complex and sophisticated financial package.
I think it's fair to say this project would never have happened without the investment tax credit, because one of the keys to putting the financing in place was our ability to raise a third of the funds, if you will, in terms of equity. And the only way we could have raised that equity in this project was through the availability of the investment tax credit.
By 1983, this vestige of history between 18th and 20th Streets on the near west side of St. Louis was ready. Ready for a facelift that would restore prestige and pride, not only to a fallen down building, but also to a city working diligently to improve its image.
At first, we weren't quite sure of the feasibility of it, in all truth. But the building is so huge that at first visit, it's impossible to digest the complexity and the size and everything that can be done with the station. As we got into it, we spent about a week here analyzing the building in itself for the first got at the design process, and development process, as we began to understand the building and what it could be made of the building, our views changed totally. As we explored it, as we went through the different parts of the project, its feasibility became very apparent. And then it became a challenge.
Obviously, there are not as many craftsmen now as there were then to do this kind of work, but we are finding that increasingly over the past 10 years, there have been more and more people getting involved again, wanting to learn these old crafts because restoration and rehabilitation is becoming a bigger business than it had been previously. We were very fortunate in locating the Conrad Schmidt Studios from Milwaukee, who are helping us with the interior restoration.
When we looked at the Grand Hall, we recognized that although we had an idea of what it looked like because of photographs originally, we had no idea what the color was, because they obviously did not have color photographs in those days. We wanted to see if we could come as close as possible to what they had originally. And we took paint chips and put paint chips under microscopes, and we're able to go through layer by layer by layer as to what the original color was.
That room will be completely scaffolded from end to end, from bottom to top. Every space will be reachable and accessible to us. Wall, ceiling, all of it will be accessible, that we can reach and do this job, because otherwise, if we're standing there stretching for anything, we're not doing the job right.
The main hall, the Grand Hall, is essentially the exact same color scheme that it was when it was originally built in 1894.
We had a very similar story when we were coming to analyze the color of the shed. And we were able to separate out 9 different layers of paint. Everyone looked at that shed over the years and said it was dark. That wasn't the case. All 9 of those colors were all light in color. The first one was closer to buff, and then there was a kind of a white. And then for years after that, they used a silver. And the dark that we see now is really just soot and grime that has developed over time. In many ways, the building today looks much closer to what it looked in 1894 when it opened than it looked in the 1940s and 50s when most of the people of St. Louis who remember the building used the building.
The first train pulled into this terminal on the morning of September 2nd, 1894. The Grand Hall was jammed with a curious, enthusiastic crowd. The time was 1:45 in the morning. From that moment, Union Station began collecting a century's worth of stories, holding on to them for decades at a time. The restoration here uncovered many secrets and provided some rare glimpses of the station's history. A hidden treasure from the station's original designers was uncovered in this wall.
In old books on the station, there were little views that showed that there was oil paintings stuck in the niches, and these were done by Albert Fleury, a French-born artist who worked with Healy and Millet. And in walking through the corridor, right through the back, paint was peeling, and just, I wonder what's here, and just ran my hand on the painting, and there were little bits of tree and leaves and water. Couldn't tell quite what it was, and we knew the painting was still there. Why it was painted over, I couldn't tell you, and got it right back to the original painting. But it even has the name, it's signed, Albert Fleury for Healy and Millet in the bottom corner.
Those who remember Union Station remember mostly how it touched their own lives. The biggest crowds filled Union Station in the 40s, the war years. 100,000 travelers a day poured through the station then. Soldiers and sailors on their way to war. Wives and girlfriends praying they would return home, safe and soon. In 1948, Missouri-born Harry Truman was elected to his first full term as president. In the early morning hours after the election, the Truman Party rolled in on Union Station's track number 32. It was here Truman held up that copy of the Chicago Tribune, proclaiming Thomas Dewey had won the election. Charlie Cross worked as a messenger at Union Station. He remembers Harry Truman well.
The biggest thrill of anybody coming through the station to me was seeing Harry Truman and actually talking to him. He was really very easy to talk to. His wife just smiled, but Harry would talk to people. He was very nice people. We saw some movie stars down here, as I've told you, Jeanette MacDonald and Jimmy Cagney, who had orange hair, I might add. I guess it turned out blonde on on the screen, but it was absolutely orange when you saw it. My grandfather, then my father, an aunt, an uncle, my brother, who worked on the mail and baggage department, myself, my niece, and my 2 sons have all worked in this building. So it's very much a part of our family.
Charlie Cross remembers, and so do untold thousands of others. They remember what Union Station was. For the past several decades, the vision of Union Station has been of years gone by. And in living the past, we almost forgot our obligation to preserve the future. Union Station has been transformed, and today the vision is to what lies ahead.
I mean, I personally believe that this project will be internationally known and will in fact attract people from all over the world.
I think the station will refill a big piece of the hearts and minds of the people of St. Louis, because so many of the citizenry are still here today, use the station, and so many of their children are still resident in the city and have heard those stories. So to see it alive again with people, I think will bring new life to that piece of memory that's the making of cities.
I think I'm working on something that, frankly, I'm going to be able to look back at for the years to come and say, you know, I've done something that is of real consequence, and I've helped make a city a better place, and people happier for having made the effort.
St. Louis Union Station. Its original developers probably never dreamed it would come to this. But those who remember Union Station in its glory days probably never dreamed it would crumble and die either. Union Station is back. It has been reborn with dignity and pride. Its heritage still intact. This is St. Louis Union Station, the 2nd century. The dream has become real.